Mhm.
There we
Welcome
go.
to the History of LA Ska one-on-one sessions. I'm your host, Junor Francis. This series celebrates and aims to preserve and promote the ska, rocksteady, and vintage reggae scene in Southern California and beyond through insightful conversations with legends and modern-day talent, including those behind the scenes. So a lot of people working behind the scenes. We really and truly want to thank them. So whether you listen to this podcast series or watch us on YouTube, many thanks and abundance of thanks for your support. On this episode, we welcome guitarist, songwriter, DJ, and dub master, Agent J, Jayson Nugent of the Slackers, who's also known as Crazy Baldhead. Welcome, Jay, and thanks for taking time out of your schedule to join us.
Thanks for having me so much. I'm honored. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. So how is everything going with you?
Good. Just enjoying the winter. Did a lot of traveling and doing music stuff, and just hitting the road next week with the Slackers. So.
Did you go to a warm climate? Because I know you're in New York, right?
In New York, yeah. But
was
in Jamaica for a minute, like a month ago, and just down in Argentina. Got back yesterday morning. Really, both of those were just vacations, no work involved, but just just getting out of town for a minute and hanging with some friends and family and stuff.
Right. So what's the reggae scene like in Argentina? Let's start with that one since
I didn't see any live gigs. I did some DJing down there just for fun. Some friends have some nights.
Club or
cool.
house?
What's that?
In someone's house or in a club?
No, in like bars. It was a one club thing, but like mostly just bars. And I'm sure there is like a sound system scene. I didn't see any live gigs, but this was just kind of casual DJ situation. And the scene is a little older. Most of them are like, same age. Like I'm 50 now, so most of them are like 90s, early 2000s ska, ska crowd that kind of got into reggae too. So it's that kind of scene. I don't know if there's a younger scene really happening for reggae down there.
Right. That would be sad if there isn't, because Argentina is one of the biggest countries. I guess you have Brazil, Argentina, Mexico. They are fighting for number one. Perhaps Brazil may be number one. I'm not sure, but I know a lot of they tour extensively.
The scene, I've heard Mexico, Brazil is good.
Brazil.
They definitely have ska bands and reggae artists. We played with Dread Marie a few years ago.
I know him. Yeah.
He was a big artist down there. Right. And he was big in California. We opened up for him once or twice in California, and he had a big following there too.
Right. Yeah. Also Jamaica. You were in Jamaica fairly recent?
Yeah, end of February, just hanging with some friends, and actually the old trumpet player from the Slackers, Jeremy Mushlin, was one of the guys I was hanging out with, and we just went out to this little town in St. Elizabeth's, and we're just fishing and hanging on the water and just taking it easy, like no music business, no town, just hanging out.
So you avoided Kingston, the epicenter, where?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say we avoided it. We just didn't pass through there, because where we were was like halfway between like Kingston and the Grill. So it wasn't really close. And a lot of the roads are like, the coast road and stuff is not so good. So even though it's not that far, it's still like 3 hours into town,
So you didn't get to meet up with some of the musicians?
No. I did that years ago when I first went to Jamaica in 95. I was fortunate enough to I met Iroy, I met Prince Jazzbo, I met Prince Buster, saw like Flabba Holt on the street on Orange Street. I didn't talk to him. Went over to Tough Gong record pressing and plant and store on Marcus Garvey Drive. So that was really like an amazing trip for me.
Oh, so you have done that trip also? Right.
Years ago, yeah, when I was a kid, early 20s. I think I was 22 when I did that, and really just getting into reggae heavily,
Right. And how long you stayed?
Back then, or just this time? I think just a week.
No, back then. I'm talking about back then.
Back then, I think just 6 days.
How were you able to meet these musicians? They were.
We just went into town one day. We were staying in Port Antonio in the North Coast, and we just took a day trip down into town. Met some like a Kingstonian friend who was going to kind of guide us, like what were the safest roads to take and how to get from place to place, and went down to like the port, harbor area, and went over to Orange Street, and literally just the shops were like still hanging on then. I guess now they've kind of revitalized, but
Yes.
by the end of the 90s, stuff had really died out down there, but they were still going. And the guys from the 70s and 60s were like, you know, in their 50s, 60s. So they were still around. So like you could just go into the shop and like the shop is there, and you know, Prince Buster's in his back office and comes out, and you know, you go to I couldn't believe at Tough Gong, and I walk in, and who's behind the counter actually playing tracks for people to buy, and it's a scene right out of Rockers where there's like a dozen people just kind of hanging out, talking, hitting you up, like pitching their music and like trying to chat you up, and guys just hanging out digging the music. And who's playing music behind the counter, like selling records, working at the shop, but Prince Jazzbo. And I like recognized him immediately. I was like, holy shit. It was like, you know, who walks in? Iroy walks in, and Blood and Fire label had just started. They were reissuing stuff in the mid 90s. They were like a CD reissue label of stuff from the 70s that had never been on CD and had never really seen like a US release or anything. So he came in with his CDs that he had obviously gotten from them as comps or part of his payment. And super nice guy. And I recognized him immediately. And he was just pitching his CDs and just hanging out. And I was like, man, this scene is like still going. The 70s scene is still happening over here. It was really cool.
Interesting, sir. So who are some of your earliest musical influences?
For me,
yes,
you know, I'm born in the early 70s, and the stuff I grew up on was like 60s, 70s rock. That was the stuff that was on in my house. Those are the records my dad had, was like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and Moody Blues. And I remember when John Lennon was killed, and my mom went out and bought like the 2 volumes of the Beatles, the best, you know, greatest hits of the Beatles, like 62 to 66 and 67 to 70. So we listened to those endlessly. So it was a lot of that kind of stuff. But I remember hearing as a kid, maybe I was 9 or 10, and Musical Youth came out with Pass the Dutchie. That was like a hit. And we didn't have MTV, believe it or not. Like Queens, where I grew up, didn't get MTV, didn't get cable till like 1986. So, you know, like I had to like go to my cousin's house in New Jersey or something to see any of these videos, but it would be on the radio occasionally. And I'm like, what is this music? It sounds awesome. And it was super catchy. And I just like wanted more of this. But, you know, Queens has a lot of West Indians, but it's a big borough. In my neighborhood, it wasn't a West Indian neighborhood at all. And, you know, I was 9 or 10. I didn't have money to go to the record store or whatever. So it took years again before I started hearing reggae in my like mid-late teens.
Well, during that time, 1 or 2 radio stations were playing, for sure, I know WLIB, and I think they covered the tri-state. They had reggae. I think.
Yeah, I wish I knew, you know. It was the kind of thing, you know, in those days, like now you just have the internet, you're into something, you could search for it.
Right.
Then to get into music, you had to have somebody that was into it that had to tell you about it. You know, you could hunt up and down the dial, but unless you caught it at the right time, you might not hear what was going on. And it was like, that was the thing. You'd have to have a friend that would give you a mixtape. You know, that's how I got into ska. That's how I got into like punk and hardcore. Like you had to know somebody that gave you a mixtape, or like I had an older brother, luckily, who got me into great music. So he would, you know, get stuff, and he got me into Jimi Hendrix and like, you know, the Clash and stuff like that. So I was fortunate for that, but he never really got into reggae, so I never got into reggae.
So your first introduction was Musical Youth, to the best of your knowledge?
I think Musical Youth, yeah, that was probably the first time really hearing any reggae, was like, because that was a hit in the US.
Because back then no MTV, so essentially people were listening to radio stations.
Yeah, I think I must have seen it on like, at the time they had Friday night videos, which was like on at Friday, maybe 11 or midnight or something like that. There'd be a half-hour like top 10 countdown. So I don't know if that was on then. It might have been on that, or I might have been at my cousin's house or something and had it on, or it might have actually just been on the radio. Because like you could, I think back there was a station WPLJ, which I went to top 40 sometime 1984. They went to a top 40, but they might have been before. But top 40 in the early 80s was kind of rock and live band music before it went to like dance music. So you would hear like the Police, and you'd hear, Madness with Our House in the Middle of the Street, and you'd hear Musical Youth and stuff like that.
So there was a lot of crossover during that time.
I guess just whatever stuff like that, they were having hits. We didn't really realize it at the time, but like even like Culture Club, when you listen back, you're like, oh damn, like this is reggae, like all this kind of music.
But it wasn't
just
defined.
I never realized how much infiltration there was.
Right, right.
And I guess if you're from the UK or something, you would have followed you would have been exposed to it earlier from the 70s, from like the first reggae boom in the late 60s, 70s, and then from two-tone reviving ska, you would have seen a clear line. So by the early 80s, you would have been familiar with the sounds that you were hearing. Whereas as a little kid, 9 or 10 years old in the early 80s, hearing stuff like that, it's like we had no context for it, but it sounded great. Right.
Difficult next to impossible to hear. But if you were born and raised in the UK, especially London, you're going to hear it. Some of the major.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's one of the big advantage.
Yeah.
People who were born in England.
Yeah, there is much more knowledge, and it's much more part of the musical landscape,
Because when Prince was his first trip to London, the way he was received, I was shocked. I wasn't expecting that. Yeah, so people did know about the music to him, and of course, a couple of years along the line, you had Millie Small, which my boy Lollipop took the music to another level. So you did play with Stillborn All Stars and Agent 99. Can you tell us how long and how about those groups?
The first real band I was in was Agent 99, and Dania Best was the band leader and the singer, and we had another singer, Gail. I can't believe her last name is escaping me. But Dania was actually briefly a backup singer in the Slackers from like 91 to 92, and left or whatever, and so wanted to get a band together. And I didn't know her at the time, but I knew like Hugh Max, the singer of the Slackers, from around on 8th Street. He used to hand out flyers, and just through mutual friends, I think my friend Delmar, who's like a DJ out here, knew Dania, and he was like, hey, let me introduce you to my friend. She needs a guitarist for her band. This is like 93. And I had heard like Fishbone and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, I hear what's going on. I think I could fake that. I could play that kind of style. And so Dania took a chance on me and hired me for her band, Agent 99. I guess we only named it that like later. We had another name first, but it became Agent 99. And that was how I met. We would play with the Slackers a lot, just bar gigs and stuff around the East Village mostly. So that's where I met Vic and the other Slackers, and through them, like we met like doing ska shows. We met King Django, Jeff Baker, who started Stubborn All Stars. He had this band Skinnerbox, and I guess he was getting Stubborn All Stars together. He wanted to do like a traditional like oldies ska, not like kind of third wave dance hall funk thing that Skinnerbox was. And so he was working with Vic and this guy Taggio, and he needed people because there weren't like a lot of people that were really listening to that. But I had been checking out like rocksteady stuff, Desmond Decker and Dobby Dobson and Derek Morgan, and I really liked all that stuff, but nobody was playing this stuff. And bands were maybe dabbling with it, but they, like the Blue Beats hadn't started yet. Nobody was really doing it. And I think Vic, which really helped me out, he recommended me to King Django and was like, this guy plays guitar, his band does this, but he's really into Rocksteady and Scatolites and Prince Buster, and he knows this music and he's going to play it correctly. So that Vic really helped me out with that by getting me in to Stubborn All Stars, and that it just snowballed from there, getting more and more gigs. And that was, I guess, 94 or something. We started rehearsing the first Stubborn record, which maybe came out in 95, or we recorded it in 95 and it came out in 96. I forget the exact time frame.
And what are some of the highlights working with those bands?
First time, I had done some studio recording with Agent 99, but recording at Coyote Studios Jeff found it. He just checked around and asked around, and these guys, the Kaidi brothers, just two brothers from Brooklyn, had this really nice studio in Williamsburg. When Williamsburg then was just like warehouses and, you know, like a lot of abandoned buildings and warehouses and stuff on the waterfront. There wasn't like the whole scene that there is today. But these guys had this great studio, and in those days it was, you know, they had a tape machine and a really nice API board. I didn't know about any of this stuff, but they had a really nice live room, a real piano, old gear from the 50s and 60s. And so that was really nice, going into a studio like that, have a whole big band in one room. And our first gig, we did like a bar gig right off of St. Mark's Place on 3rd Avenue at this place called the Continental. And Chris Dowd from Fishbone sat in with us.
Manhattan, right?
What's that?
Manhattan.
Yeah. And for me, like the first ska I really heard was Fishbone, and I was a big Fishbone fan. Like in high school, 89, 90, I discovered them. So I'm like playing this first Stubborn gig, and I'm like, holy shit, I'm on stage with a guy in Fishbone. I'm actually playing a gig with one of the guys from Fishbone. So that blew my mind. And just, you know, the touring, we did one tour, and in 96, we were doing a US tour, like swinging through the South, and we get a call from like Rancid's booking agent. And literally we pull over on the side of the road, because I think Jeff had a cell phone in 95, which was like, or 96, it was a big deal. So we pull over to take the call, and like, it's like, Rancid wants us to come to Europe with them and open for them. And it was like March, and this was like 2 months later. It was like in June, you know, or whatever, May and June. And we were like freaking out. We were like, holy shit, this is our second tour. We're going to Europe. We're going to open for Rancid. Like, it's on, you know. So moments like that were like when the sky was the limit, you know. It was amazing. Yeah, as a kid, I was 22 or something like that, 23 maybe. Those are the...
Yes, I can imagine. Some people have been playing for years and still haven't had that kind of opportunity.
You know, but that's the thing is...
Rightness of time, rightness of place, I believe.
You got, exactly. And you're getting in at the ground floor when even though ska had been in the US, it was just really starting to gain momentum. And luckily, bands like Rancid were cool about trying to find, you know, bands that weren't just like younger, less experienced versions of themselves. They were actually trying to bring different music in front of their fans, even if it might be a tough sell.
Right.
They took risks like that, which I'm very grateful for.
Yes.
They really opened the door to a lot of bands. You know, they didn't just get big and then shut the door behind them. They really like held down the ladder to a lot of people. It was very cool. But, you know, as you learn, it's like stuff gets big, and then you got to hold on, because it's not going to, you know, rarely does it stay like that. So you got to be cool for like the downslope during the lean years, you know. So we definitely had lean years, and you got to just hold on for the ride, you know.
So when did you join the Slackers?
Full time in 2004, but I played my first gig with them in 1994. As
a member, or you were recruited to?
Like just sitting in. I think I might have just, I don't know if Agent 99 was on the bill, or I had just been hanging out, because we all rehearsed at the same place. And it was just kind of a free-for-all. Like people, there would be different horn players in and out, different percussion people. And I think they just let me sit in. And believe it or not, the first gig I played with them, I played melodica, you know, so I kind of knew the chord, which I barely can play keyboards even now, still years later. But they let me kind of hang out on the stage at the, you know, whatever, Ludlow Street Cafe, and, you know, noodle on the melodica. So that was actually my first gig, was 94. And I did a tour with them in 2001 as a second guitar player, kind of playing the pick parts and, you know, little accompanying parts, like doubling the bass line. But I didn't join the band full time till 2004.
So where did you learn music? Started working my way backwards instead of...
My father played guitar. When I was a kid. He wasn't professional, but, you know, he was like in business, and he had a car business. And so as a little kid, he would come home from work, and that's how he would wind down from work. It was like going into his bedroom and had like solitude, and he'd have acoustic guitar, and he'd play like, you know, Simon and Garfunkel songs and Moody Blues songs and stuff like that. So I didn't really see my dad at work at that age. but I saw him playing guitar and I was like, that's the coolest thing. I'm going to do that one day, you know? And I had an older brother who got a guitar too before me. And I was too young for my dad to teach. My hands weren't big enough and I wasn't patient enough. So he would teach my older brother. And I was like, you know, I wanted to learn too, but, you know, I understand now I wasn't really ready, but I had that like determination. I wanted to do it. So when I was 14, I kind of picked it up, and it was really like listening to Jimi Hendrix. Like my brother turned me on to Jimi Hendrix, and so I was listening to a couple of those records, and I was like, man, I really want to do this now. And so I started to get into it, and you know, took little lessons at the guitar store, and would kind of play along to like Black Sabbath or Ramones, because the Hendrix stuff was way above my head, and mostly
You
still
know,
is, you know.
I can imagine. Way above everybody's head, practically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, where's your father now?
He's down in Fort Lauderdale.
So,
Him
I'm
and my
quite
mom
sure.
retired.
I'm quite sure he's extremely proud of your accomplishment.
Now, yeah, you know, there's definitely years where it's like, okay, that's nice. When are you going to get a real job? You know, and it's at a certain point when it's like, okay, you're traveling all over the world all the time, and you're, you know, at least eking out a living doing this. I guess this is your thing, you know. So, and now, you know, it's like, fortunately, the Slackers like get played around and people talk about the Slackers, you know, and it's usually like the early stuff before I was in the band, but just the fact the name's out there.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad mentions it to people, and they, you know, a lot of people he mentions it to know the band. So he's like kind of proud in that way, like, oh, okay, I guess this is a real thing you're doing, you know.
But playing ska and rocksteady and early reggae, this is sheer speculation. You don't have extremely deep pocket from doing that.
Not so much, you know. But, you know, it's a weird thing because, you know, the grass is always greener. It's always easy to think like, oh, if I had played indie rock, or if I had gone to a punk band in the early 90s, and that would be it. But you never know, you know, it may be a bigger scene and more lucrative, and the ceiling is much higher, but it's also like you're in a much bigger pond, you know, whereas like the thing about ska, it's like, it's a small, very small pond. When you actually get down to bands that are making a living at it, it's a really short list. And you know, we didn't get in at the ground floor, you know, or in the US even, or, you know, bands like maybe the Toasters or Untouchables or whatever were doing it from the early 80s, mid 80s, Fishbone or whatever. But when it started to snowball, we were already doing it, you know. So,
you know, our professor once said it's extremely important to do what you love in life.
Yep. Find
And
what
you're
you
doing
love
what
and
you
let it
love
kill
in
you.
life. Yeah. You're doing what?
I think it was Charles Bukowski or something said, find what you love and let it kill you.
Yeah, there you go. I came across that one as well.
Which I take to mean just do it until you're dead. Maybe
That's
don't
right.
actually let it kill you. You know, hopefully it makes you live longer.
No, and I second that. I think it will make you longer. You know,
You know, I look at guys like Larry McDonald, who were 85,
right?
about
He was out here recent.
86, and are like in their prime, fronting
Man,
bands, doing
you know,
sessions, several gigs a night,
man,
crushing it on the congas, singing,
the
like
supreme
partying.
joy that he gets, you can't get that anywhere else.
It's like an inspiration. That is like, whatever he's doing, do that, because that's working, you know.
Yes, sir. So literally, I think the Slackers can be defined as road warriors, considering how many tours and cities and overseas gigs you guys perform on yearly. Is it a fair and accurate description?
Yeah, you know, I would say that, yeah, you know, we like the term road dogs, you know, because it's like,
I like warrior.
like, I'm not gonna lie and say it's like, you know, we're like in Black Flag or so, you know, where it's like hard not. We tour actually pretty civilized. When I joined the band full time, we were kind of in the last days of like, you know, 3 or 4 guys to a hotel room with some guys sleeping on the floor. We weren't really doing overnight drives anymore. Not really doing these long cross-country death marches, but we have been there since the 90s. We have done those. We have done a million all-night drives, you know, the broken down vans, the police trouble, the crowd trouble, the catching guys breaking into your gear, you know, standoffs and those kind of things, having to like pretty much shake the promoter upside down to get the money out of them, or like strong arm them and walk them to the ATM. You know, the band has done all of those things. So getting beaten up by cops. Yeah, as I'm thinking about it, like it's a long list. So in that respect, maybe Warriors, but we actually tour pretty civilized. It's pretty cushy. I think the Bouncing Souls call it gentleman's touring, where it's like everyone has a bed, everyone has a shower, it's like there's catering, you get treated decently, everyone comes home with, their pay. So it's we get treated good these past years.
Mm-hmm. And tell us about your tour across the US.
The upcoming?
No, past.
Oh, past.
Where's some of the places? Have you toured every city, every hamlet, as Shakespeare say, every town?
I think the band before me definitely hit some spots. Like for me, I think there's maybe 5 states I have not played.
That's
I want to say Mississippi, Wisconsin, North or South Dakota, and Alaska. I've never played, but the band has played North Dakota. I think the band has played not Wisconsin, Wyoming, if I said Wisconsin. So they've played like a couple more states than me and a couple other towns. And at the same time, before I joined the band, like I was playing with Stubborn All-Stars and King Django, and we toured pretty regularly too. And then I played guitar for Ari Up from the Slits for a few years in the early 2000s. And we didn't do so much US, but we did some Europe and UK. So there's been a bunch, touring across the road with the Slackers is good, except there was a lot of guys in the band. Like when I joined, it was 7 guys, so it's like at least one of the benches in the van would have 3 guys in it, so it like, and a lot of the drives were longer than we're doing now. So it's like, there would be, 6-8 hour drives were pretty regular. I remember some gigs like rolling up like 8-hour drive to like Fort Smith, Arkansas, and we like finally get there and it's like some DIY, and it's like winter and some DIY space with no heat. So we get in, the club's freezing, it's not even open. So after an 8-hour drive, we all just like literally get back in the van and like turn the heat on. And so we're like, really, man, are we like sitting in the van after an 8-hour drive because the club is too cold, But those are the things that you discover when you're driving across the road and they, try and convince you to put peanuts in your Coca-Cola in Missouri because that's like a local tradition or something, or,
yes,
things like that,
So all your life you practice one profession and one only, that is playing music. You've all your life.
Profession-wise, yeah, I've had a lot of dumb jobs. But yeah, the only thing I've done consistently that I could call a career, it was music.
Wonderful, man.
Playing live, yeah.
Yes. Great. So how do you keep yourself motivated so you don't get burnout?
I work I work on my own music. Like Crazy Baldhead is sort of like a studio band I have. We've done some live gigs. We backed a few Jamaican artists a few years ago.
Drop some name. Let's
stretch of maybe 5 years. What's that?
Drop the name. Who you back? I'm curious.
We did Stranger Cole and Patsy. We did Ken Booth. We did.
Oh, you can just. So those are not just some musicians. Those are big names in the fraternity.
Yeah, no, real stuff. When I was first getting into like rocksteady and ska, like these are the artists I was hearing on these compilations, and I'm like,
no, you're backing them.
I can't believe this. And I'm being the band leader. I'm the one talking to them on stage and figuring out the song and what song we're going to play next. And when you're huddling with Ken Booth or Derek Morgan and they're like, all right, I want to do this. How can you guys play this? Can you do that? And I'm like, oh yeah, Far East, we know that one, like kind of pull that out. That's not on the set list and things like that. And some of them were tougher than others, but it was an amazing experience for all that. Ken Parker, we did, I'm trying to think who else. Monty Morris didn't make it through. But yeah, the last one we did was Derek Morgan, which was amazing. So and those were great experiences. What's that?
How recent?
2015 was the last show. We started in 2011 with this production crew called Dig Deeper, which was 3 people that they were mostly doing soul artists. They were like deep soul heads, so they would dig out like kind of one-hit wonder soul artists or like lesser known, but like maybe they would get like Barbara Lynn that would, that actually had hits. Some people that would have like, a soul or R&B hit in the late 60s, early 70s, but hasn't sung in a while. And they would get them a real band that really knew their tunes, real piano, real horns, backup singers. And after a couple of years of doing that, they wanted to do some Jamaican artists too, because they're into that.
Yes.
So like once or twice a year, they would get me to put together a band for that. And, they would get different artists, and same way, they wanted to do a thing, because a lot of Jamaican artists would come through, like New York in particular, I guess a lot of other places, but there's a lot of shady promoters where it's like the artist shows up, it's maybe like $40 at the door, and when you get there, they tell you it's 50, and then you get in and the artist is like singing along to a CD, and it's like, you kind of feel gypped as an audience member. And the artist is like not going to perform till they get all the money from the promoter, and so the artist doesn't want to come back because it's just, the deal. It's just shady business. And so the Dig Deeper people wanted to do like a proper show.
Yes.
Pay the artist, fly them in, get them a good hotel, give them their advance money, pay them before they hit the stage, get them a real band that knew the material and knew the style. And, it showed in the shows. It was like a good presentation. And, it's like obviously like Dub Club or shows in LA they get like great bands that, of younger musicians that idolize these artists and really want to play this stuff as legit as possible. Europe too. So yeah, it's, it's cool that we can do that. And to play with those artists that we got into the music from is, you can't put it into words.
So that's not necessarily happening anymore in New York, right?
Not at the moment. Even pre-pandemic, expenses are so high to fly artists in, the hotel, the band, and even, a band of 7 pieces or something like that costs a certain money. So, they pretty much need a sellout just to break even. That was kind of their, and they were all professionals in other professions, so like they weren't professional promoters. They were really doing it for the love of it. They were doing shows every month, and they were kind of at the point where like they needed to sell out to break even. So I think it got to the point where it was just so much work, and even though it was a labor of love, to do that much work for no money is, at some point, I think they were like, after maybe, I don't know, 8 or 10 years, I think they kind of called it quits for a minute.
Right.
But before the pandemic, they were talking about doing more shows, but obviously fate intervened. Right.
I know you're a big dub fan. What are some of your biggest influences and your first dub project? Sort of a twin.
I would think, like Augustus Pablo, listening to that stuff that he did with Jacob Miller, 74, 75, the Who Say Jono Dread record, which I guess was dubbed at King Tubby's, but I've heard Philip Smart dubbed it, or maybe even who was it? Pat Kelly, I think, was a mix engineer at King Tubby's for a minute. Might have actually been the engineer on it. That was like the first record that like blew my mind. But then like
single or full length album.
The full length LP that is really just a collection of the A and B side. So you have the A, the vocal side, and then you'd have the dub side after it. So the recordings are great. I guess they were done at Dynamic or Randy's, but I think they were cut at Dynamic. And just the drum sounds, the sounds of those records are amazing, but the dubs are like, still like blow me away. And then from there, got into King Tubby and Scientist. And in '94, the Slackers went to Japan before I was in the band. And their buddy Happy, who was kind of like a side vocalist and kind of just a partial organizer, he went with them. And I stayed at his apartment. I sat for him in the East Village. And so I went through his record collection for those 2 weeks, because there was a lot of stuff I didn't have. I only had a few records. And so he had all these Scientist records that I was going through, like Heavy Metal Dub and, Dub's the World Cup and Scientist Meets Pac-Man and all this stuff. So I would go through all his Scientist records. So after those 2 weeks, I had this like vocabulary of like Scientist style dubs in my head. And then Mad Professor, I got into working at this record store called Jammy Land, which was like a reggae shop in the East Village that I worked at from maybe '96 to on and off to 2000 something. And so I would go through the records, and we would have a full catalog of the Dub Me Crazy Arawa stuff by Mad Professor, and also Ranking Ann and stuff like that he produced and did the dubs. So that stuff was great. And then, you know, really my teacher for that was Victor Rice, who's a bass player and producer from New York, who now lives down in Brazil, but he was with us at Version City, one of the guys who had the keys when Django set up the studio. And so he was the one that kind of dialed in the delays and stuff like that, and was kind of showing me how to route stuff through other channels, how to get the delay to feedback, how to EQ it, how to sweep stuff. And actually seeing it in practice, he was the guy who really showed me how to actually work the board and route everything and kind of set up your sends and returns. And so that was really the first real practical lesson in how to do it.
So if you were to pick one dub engineer, who would it be? That's all you can pick is one.
Man.
And live with the consequences.
You know, the thing with Tubbies is that a lot of records are, you know, mixed by King Tubbies, but it's mixed by King Tubby's studio. It's not necessarily King Tubby. So it's hard to say, would it be King Tubby? Because there's, you know, several other engineers at his studio. So one single engineer, it would probably be Scientist.
Right. All right. You make it.
I would think.
Good one. Good one.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Tubby's student and, you know, arguably eclipsed him, you know.
You did not, but I think Errol Thompson, who mixed for Joe Gibbs, would be number
one. Yeah. And as far as overall engineer or dub engineer, but I guess, yeah, Errol Thompson or Sylvain Morris at Studio One, who's the dub specialist.
But King Tubby's is, you know, a couple miles ahead. So I had
but I mean,
I don't compare him with anyone else.
I love those. They're really simple, but those Studio One dubs, those series of dub specialist records are awesome. And who was doing Randy's? Was it
I can't remember.
Not Clive Chin, I guess, was engineering, but I don't know who else was engineering there who might have done dubs, but the like Java.
That was the first dub. Right?
Yeah, Clive Chin, I know, produced some of that stuff. I don't know if he actually was the guy on the board, but that stuff sounds amazing.
Yes, that's really and truly a live forever dub. So some of the vocalists you work with over the years, as Crazy, Baldhead, including Vic, you mentioned him, Rockery.
Yeah. Rockery, even
New York. It was New York based, right? Or still is New
What's
York.
That?
Rocky.
Yeah, he's from Brooklyn.
Right.
So he was out here. I worked with him a lot. He definitely taught me a lot because he's really really musical guy, really good singer, multi-instrumentalist. He definitely knew his way around a mixing board, really deep into Jamaican music. Even though his thing was mostly like kind of a dance hall, like a conscious dance hall thing he would do vocally, but he grew up singing in church, so he sung really well, and he also listened to like Jamaican music going back to ska and had a really deep record collection. Lots of other little like local singers that would sit in on tracks that I don't know if went on to other stuff, but I'm like drawing a blank now.
Well, I can rattle off some name. You have King Django.
Alex Desire, Steve Jackson,
even Jesse Wagner from Los Angeles.
Yep, yeah, Jesse, who just did a track for me. Opie Ortiz, Bucket from the Toasters sang with me. Glenn from the Slackers did a Stones tune we did like a reggae version of. I forgot some of those records had like a million singers on them. Todd Faustnacht from the Snails, Brucky from the Frighteners. Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on like all these singers. You know, a lot of these guys like sang almost whole records for me, you know. So
what happened to those records? Are they out?
Most of them are sold out. Like the record I did with Brucky from the Frighteners, Boots and Braces, I literally have maybe my own personal copies here. That's been sold out for, you know, it came out 10 years ago and that's been sold out a while. Sound of 69 I did that had different singers doing tracks from 1969, but in like a Jamaican style. That's been sold out for years. One I put out in 2015, 2016, the Stereo Prophecy and Electric Hymns, that I still have maybe 100 copies of. And Go Oasis I put out in 2020. that had a few different guest singers. Vic Ruggiero sang on it, and this woman Leslie Marie Cook, and a few other singers sat in. That sold out as well. I think maybe in Europe, the label in Europe might have 50 or 70 copies left or something like that. So we do short runs of stuff, but fortunately we sell out of them. It's good to kind of have them around to sell to the people that want the copy years later, but it's good to like recoup your money, to be able to just sell it and like you did it, it's gone, and you snooze, you lose.
So you're not reproducing because records are back.
Yeah, yes. I always put out record. I always put out vinyl, but I don't think there's really enough. It's a small little secret side project band, so I don't know if there's really enough of a demand for me to press like another 300 or 500 LPs, because it's a big financial investment to do that. And
you try to. How about the distribution company?
I would think if I had somebody really banging down my door, that would be like, yes, we can get this into UK, we can get this into California, and we're going to find 500 more people to buy it. And they were convinced, and they gave me a letter of intent to like take
But you've never really taken the initiative to find someone. You haven't done that.
I have new music. I'd rather do that, and I have my own little label.
On Jamaica, move on to the next project.
Yeah, I mean, I figure that's sold out. So, if something really hit, if something became a little scene hit or got in a commercial or got in a movie and there was a call for it to repress it, sure, I would do it. But just to sell it myself with my own distribution, I could probably hustle it, but I'd rather put out, like I'm putting out 45s on my own label. I'd rather concentrate on rather than put out a record of 10 or 12 songs, concentrate on like 1 or 2 songs, like get the absolute top material from a certain artist or a certain style that I can do, and make the best single record I can make, and really kind of push one song rather than push a whole LP.
And what exactly are you working on now?
The last thing I'm waiting for from the pressing plant is an EP I did with Dave Hilliard and the Rocksteady 7. So it's Rocksteady 7 meets Crazy Baldhead. So I kind of made the rhythms and did the production, and Dave Hilliard and his trombonist, my trombonist too, Buford O'Sullivan, wrote melodies, and they wrote the songs on top of the rhythms, kind of like the Tommy McCook and Supersonics kind of setup. And then I would do the production and whatever. So we made this 4-song EP in 2020 that we put out digitally. And people have been asking about it. People really like it. And I think it's a safe bet to press up. So I sent it out to the pressing plant in February or something like that. And I got the test pressings back a couple of weeks ago, and it sounds great. So hopefully I'll have that by May or June or something in vinyl.
You have any product you can show our listeners, viewers?
Yes. Give me 1 second. So.
You have to pay me for this commercial.
Yeah.
I guess he wasn't quite ready for this. Yes, a nice setup, eh?
Yeah, sorry, I'm like always unprepared. I'm like the worst at promotion. So thank you for asking. So this is the last one that we actually have pressed up, and I will show it to you right there. That is it backwards? Okay.
The Old Neighborhood, right? The label is Old Neighborhood.
Old Neighborhood Music. And this one is by Kaz Gardner from people from DC might remember the Checkered Cabs, and she kind of does she's done a few records with Victor Rice, who produced this, and she does kind of soul and kind of mod stuff now she's been doing. But she did this great version produced by Victor Rice. It's like a kind of upbeat, up-tempo soul, like almost a northern soul version of the Abyssinian Sada Masagana. And she does a really cool version, and Victor Rice does it like an organ.
You can actually turn Sada Masagana into a soul song, I mean, with the beats.
Yeah. And it sounds great. He told me about it, and I was like, when he played it for me, I was like, I'll take a chance on that, man. It's like, it's my own money I'm putting into it, and it's like, you know, we didn't break the internet with this record. I still have, you know, like 100 of them, 120 or something. But it's the kind of thing where, like, if I love it, I'll put my money on the line, and I want to put out good music rather than just what I think is going to sell. Obviously, I want it to sell, and it's sold okay so far. I still have more of them, but that is called Sada Soul, and it's on Old Neighborhood. I don't know if the camera's showing it backwards.
On the flip side is dub.
The one before that. What's
the
that?
Flip side is dub.
Yeah, it's an organ instrumental, actually. And this one is Opie Ortiz. Sorry, I'll flip this around. Opie, you guys may know from Long Beach Dub All Stars, and he was on the cover. He was on the cover of a Sublime record, and a really good guy. I still have never met Opie, but I made this rhythm, and I knew Roger Rivas, who plays on a lot of my stuff, and I know from the Agrolites, awesome producer, and he plays in Long Beach Dub All Stars, and I think Opie and I started talking online. He liked a track I did or something like that. And so I just messaged him like, hey man, you know, if you want to, you know, I can send you some rhythms, and I would love to have you as a vocalist on a track. And it took about a year for him to finally come back with a tune, but he really came back with a killer. And Jesse Wagner sings backup on it. It's called The Right Way. And the B-side is a dub, but it's like an instrumental piano dub with John Kwan playing piano. And it's almost kind of like a Lloyd Charmers kind of dubby piano, and it's like an up-tempo rocksteady or slow ska, depending on how you hear it. But this is called, this one is called The Right Way. This is the second record. The first one is sold out. It was like a dance hall version, like a King Jammy's dance hall remix I made of a Slackers tune called Watch This. And luckily, like on the back of the Slackers popularity, that sold out right away, which was like a great way to start a label. So these two, this one I have, I don't know, maybe like 20 left or something.
And how much you press? How much did you press?
300 I make.
Oh,
just do short, try and short and sweet, try and sell it out and move on, you know.
Move on to the next project.
Yep, I don't want to have them like sitting around forever. I've made records like that in my life. I think I still even have a couple copies of the Agent 99 7-inch from 1994, you know, because like literally we got the record in, or 95. We made the 7-inch, and then the band broke up. So like forever, like to every apartment I moved, I was lugging this same box of records. You know, it was before the internet was a thing where you could just put a record online, and nobody outside of New York ever heard of Agent 99. So nobody cared about it. But eventually I think I got rid of most of them.
Yeah, it shouldn't be hard to sell now.
Yeah.
But you mentioned moving on earlier. I'm going to do just that. My producer, good friend, Jay Cola.
Yes, Jay, how you doing?
Going on. All right. Yeah, I got like another 10 minutes.
Nice. Yeah, I've done it. Really enjoyed listening.
If that's okay with you guys. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. Enjoyed the conversation. Maddie Ruthless, you also worked with.
Oh yeah. I forgot Maddie. I like work with so many people, so I apologize to people I'm from. Maddie's done a bunch of stuff with me. She did a few things on Stereo Prophecy and Electric Hymns, and we did, I'm like drawing a blank on my own material. I'm like the worst, I'm my worst promoter. But we did this single, like a kind of slow rub-a-dub, like rockers track called Take a Lick.
Yep.
That was put out on a UK label. And it actually did well. It sold out on that label. Happy People, I think, put it out. And Happy People. And David Rodigan played it, and it actually got legs and was a cool track, and that one sold out like right away too. So that was very cool. That was the last thing I think we did together.
Yeah. No,
he has a job for us, you know, to go promote these records.
I know, man. I'm the worst at it.
People
have to tell me like,
larger than life.
Dummy, don't you have something to sell?
No.
You're sitting on a gold mine, star.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I'm sitting on, you know, it's as they say, they sold like hotcakes. Too bad they didn't sell like records. You know.
Jay, talk about your approach to playing rhythm guitar, because I was listening to your interview with Mark Wasserman and loved what you touched on there as far as your specific approach to playing.
I you know, very specifically, like I like the oldies sound, that kind of bassy, warm, like Ja Jerry sound. So I play ska like with a downstroke, so I'm hitting the low bassy strings first. I like a chunky, warm sound. And overall, guitar is not really a lead instrument unless you're soloing like Ernest Ranglin or Lynn Tate or something like that. It's not a lead instrument. It shouldn't be out front like in a rock band. It should really blend with the piano, with the organ. And what a lot of bands forget is that, ska, like any music of the day of the 60s, was the bands were backing bands. It's all about the singer, and they have to do their thing. So everything has to support what the singer's doing. So if you're playing, if I'm playing louder and I can't hear the keyboard, I'm playing too loud. If I'm playing where I can't hear the singer, I'm playing too loud. So it's all about being supportive. You're not the star, but if you do your part right, the whole band sounds good. That's really my approach. It's rhythm.
Yeah. No, I love
Interesting.
that. Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, speaking of sound, in your opinion, how has the Slackers sound changed from maybe when the Slackers first started recording and playing to when you joined, or even to now, to the most current album, Don't Let the Sunlight Fool You?
The band got smaller, so it doesn't have as big of a sound, and we don't record in like big rooms like Coyote. The first, I think, 3 or 4 records were recorded at Coyote Studio, which had a big, old style band room, wood paneling and piano and Hammond organ and stuff like that. So we don't have the budget to go to studios like that anymore. I mean, we could. We actually we record at decent studios, but Coyote isn't there anymore. Right. And also there's just less people, so the sound isn't as big. And Ara Babajan, who joined on drums in 2002, I think, he has definitely like a tighter, more aggressive sound than Luis Zuluaga had, who's the original drummer. So the band is tighter.
Yeah.
It has less of that like warm, bassy sound. I try and get that back when I mix the band. I really try and go to lengths to kind of bring that out. I try and listen to the old stuff and really check it, and try and remember like, oh, wow, this is a lot darker than I thought it was going to be. So, I think that's a thing. The sound isn't as big as it once was. It's a little more aggressive and punchy. But I think we can flex harder now. Like, people have been playing longer and we play tighter as a unit. We have a lot more gigs under our belt, a lot more records under our belt. Oh. So I think we experiment production-wise. Vic and Glenn really flex vocally. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The horns try really interesting stuff. Rhythmically, we mess around with some different beats here and there, but again, it's all gotta have something to do with like rhythm and blues and that kind of early Jamaican sound, so it can't stray too far off the beaten path. If we get weird for a minute, it's like just a diversion. We have to like back to basics before long,
Right. I do love the moniker Jamaican rock and roll. I'm not sure who.
Yeah, I don't know where. Yeah, I did. I don't necessarily ascribe to that myself. I think it's like a clever expression, but I always heard, even before I joined the Slackers, I always heard the Slackers as really, once they settled into getting horns and keyboards, as this kind of kind of like Jamaica, like the Scatolites with like Dion and the Belmonts singing with them, this kind of like Jamaican ska meets Bronx doo-wop was how I heard the Slackers.
That's a great descriptive. Yeah.
Well, I'd be remiss not to mention this. Eric and I went to see you guys in Orange County. The name of
right. Observatory here.
Yeah, Observatory. They have my approval.
Thanks. That means a lot. Man.
Yeah.
Well, you saw him before that in downtown LA. I mean, you've seen him numerous times.
But I mean, the professionalism, the musicianship, really, they're playing outside of the norm.
Very so. Earlier, you touched on it's crazy. Baldhead, some of the legends that you've backed. One of my favorite Slackers albums is the Slackers and Friends, right? Where you literally worked with numerous legends, primarily, on the reggae side, Cornell Campbell, the Congos, Dorian Schaefer, Glenn Adams, Ari, who you mentioned from the Slits, Rankin Joe, Susan Cadigan, and our own Chris Murray here. Were you all in the studio? Did you work and get a chance to meet some of those legends?
I wasn't on that record, but I did when I first joined the band. We do these booze cruises, and I'd already met Glenn Adams because he'd been around on the scene since the '90s. He'd been hanging out,
living out there, right.
I remember I was in the Insteps briefly, which is a band here, and he produced their LP, and I played on that. Wow. And he was in the studio kind of conducting the band. That was like, I don't know, 96, 97. So I remember him dancing around. That was also at Coyote. And I remember when we were playing, he was kind of conducting us to keep the groove. Wow. So I remember him just dancing around the studio, kind of pointing at people when we should be doing stuff. And, you know, that's for me, my great memory of Glenn. But also like backing him up when I first joined the band, he was still playing with the band. They had just done a record with him.
Right.
It was Slackers and Friends. And then I think Upsetting Ernesto's record, they'd done a tour with him in Europe right before I joined. So he was still sitting in at gigs, and we were doing backup gigs. We did a backup gig for him up in Westchester, which wasn't all Slackers. It was some other people that sat in with us. And I played for Ari for a while. Ashanti Roy from the Congos.
Can you real quick touch on what it was like working with Ari from the Slits?
You know, it was beautifully insane. Ari was just one of those brilliant a force of nature. And Ari, I had heard the Slits had a track on a jukebox at this place in the East Village that isn't there anymore called Nightingales. Okay. And that's where some of our early gigs with Agent 99 and the Slackers and No Commercial Value were. And they had Slits 45 on the jukebox. Like, no, there isn't a single Slits 45 in America, pretty much. And they had it, the only one happened to be at this jukebox. And I remember hearing this music, and this is like 1993 or 94, where you couldn't just go on the internet and find it. Yeah. And good luck finding a Slits record before represses, in the US. And I was like, what is this music? And somebody told me, oh, it's the Slits and whatever. And then she would come around Jammyland, because a guy I worked with that was kind of one of the main sellers at Jammyland, this guy Ross Cush, knew her from Brooklyn because she lived down in Flatbush. Mm-hmm. So she would come and hang out, and then what do you know? She's getting a band together. She had like a band in Woodstock that was all hippies, and she wanted like a kind of like edgy, kind of like punky reggae band in New York. And so I'm there hanging out, and Vic's there, and Ara's there, and she was just like, "You guys are my band now." That was great. And I toured with her after they left. I still toured with her for a couple of years. But Ari was great. She knew everybody's part. She didn't know a single note of music theory or anything. Yeah. She couldn't name you a note, but she could sing every note. And so she could sing every guitar part, even all the weird Viv Albertine stuff that was actually, I think, played by Dennis Bovell in the studio. She could hum every bass line, like note for note. She knew every drum part. So she had this, like, people have a photographic memory. She had like that auditory memory where she could hear something and, even 3 or 4 parts on top of each other and know everybody's part, like, decades later. So she was incredible.
Yeah, nice. That's great to hear. Last question for you. In New York, is the ska and reggae scene separate, or
mostly?
How much crossover is there? Because
now the past 10 or so years more, I think a lot of because New York has, at least for the US, like a big, long-standing West Indian and Jamaican community. Yeah. So for a long time when ska got going, a lot of Jamaicans weren't really interested in it. It was like they had their own scene. They had a much bigger scene in mostly in the outer boroughs, but there would be some Manhattan shows. But a few of us that had been into it for years and would also go to reggae shows and some dances and stuff, after, they had seen our faces enough 10 or 15 years, they suddenly were like, oh, we know you guys, you're okay. And it was never any hostility or anything. It's two very different scenes, two very different upbringings. But a lot of the scene kind of merged about 10, 15 years ago. A lot of the older ska heads and a lot of the kind of people doing stuff on the Jamaican reggae scene, the reggae establishment, as I call it, in New York. It was kind of like, oh, we know you guys. So they would come out more to the dances like Deadly Dragon, and they would hang out more. And record people. So that was a cool thing that started happening.
Yeah.
But they were usually pretty separate scenes, because and also a lot of ska isn't really rooted in very Jamaican music. The ska, a lot of American ska is like, there is a light sprinkling of ska on what is essentially like pop rock or punk or you know. So it's a lot of Jamaicans are just not interested in that, you know.
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what Slackers start their tour next week?
A week from Monday, actually.
Okay.
Not quite next week. The 16th, yeah. 17th, we start in Atlanta and kind of work our way back up the East Coast, to a couple Canadian dates. And then I think we're home on May Day. And then head to the Midwest mid-May and do Midwest and Southwest.
Yeah.
And then back to the East Coast for some local gigs and one of our booze cruise gigs, and then off to Europe in July.
Nice.
So it's a pretty stacked year.
Yeah, very much so. And I think out here you're going to you're playing punky reggae. You're playing punk rock bowling in Vegas.
Yeah.
That was a fun one.
That should be great. Yeah, that's a blast. We haven't done it in a few years, and it's actually we did it last year, 2 years ago. So actually, no, we actually have done it very recently. Yeah, it's always a blast.
Yeah. Well, congrats on everything. Whether you're a road dog or road warrior,
right?
I know the Slackers always kill it on the road and do so well. And congrats to all your crazy Baldhead work and everything you do for the music and scene we love so much. And give our best to the rest of the guys in the band.
Will do.
Yes, a lifetime of playing music.
So far, man. Let's keep it going, you know?
Yeah,
very much so.
You're extremely fortunate.
Yeah. Any particular website, social media that you just want to plug quickly?
Old Neighborhood Music, oldneighborhood.net. Sorry, I don't even know.
That's your label, right?
Yeah, that's my label, oldneighborhood.net. Also, there is crazybaldhead.bandcamp. There is Old Neighborhood Music.bandcamp or something like that.
Yep.
Of course, I'm totally unprepared for all this stuff, but yeah, oldneighborhood.net. We'll get you there.
We'll make sure to share.
And the Slackers have the slackers.bandcamp and the slackers.com and all that stuff too.
Yeah, and you're active.
So any Los Angeles stops you mentioned?
On this run, I'm not sure. We just played there in December.
Yeah.
So I didn't actually look. I'm really bad.
There is right now, but if so, we'll make sure to push.
Might not be on this one, so it might not be. There might be a fall one, or probably I would think a December like holiday.
Yeah.
Some kind of big holiday show.
Yeah.
We just played the Regent with. Didn't we play the Regent? Yeah, with like We Are the Union and Kill Lincoln or something like that.
Right.
Which was like an awesome show.
Yeah, they played the Observer.
That happened. I'm not making that up.
No, you did. You did. Yeah, you played the Observer.
Okay, it did happen. That was December. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll play mid-year, but other than that, I would think in December there'll be another big LA show.
Nice. Well, Jay, thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you as always.
Thank you guys so much.
For viewers and followers. And this series is produced by Rockery Radio, Eric Collet here. So I think that we don't want to take up much more of your time.
Yes, and please follow this gentleman at Junor Francis. We appreciate everyone for the support, for listening and watching us. And until next time, please get out and support your local music scene. Jay, you take care. Junior, thanks as always.
Yeah.
And much love and respect to everyone out there. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Nice one.